Now there is no more to tell of their journey, except that they rode one day after another. The day they arrived in Susa, the weather was wet and windy, and all the Niflungs were wet in their clothes. When they came to the town called Thorta, a man rode toward them. He was a messenger of King Attila, and he was supposed to ride to Bakala and invite Markgraf Rodinger to the feast. But he was riding before the army with his men. When they met, the Markgraf asked, "What is the news from Susa?" And the man answered, "The newest from Susa is that the Niflungs have come into Hunaland, and King Attila is preparing a feast for them, and I have been sent to you to invite you to the feast. Now I can turn back with you, because I have carried out my errand." And he turned around with them and rode with Markgraf Rodinger. And the Markgraf asked the messenger, "How big a feast is King Attila planning to have, and how many men have been invited?" And the messenger answered, "It does not seem that there are fewer in your group than King Attila has invited to the feast. But Queen Grimhild has invited twice as many of her friends, and she has collected men from all over the kingdom who will offer her support, and there are so many here to begin the feast that it seems that it will be a very large crowd, and that it will last a long time." Rodinger bade the man ride ahead to the castle and say that the Niflungs had arrived before King Attila's castle. He rode straight to see King Attila and told him that the Niflungs and Markgraf Rodinger had arrived before his castle. The king sent word all around the city that every house should be prepared, some with tents, and in some they should prepare a fire, and there was much preparation in the city of Susa. King Attila spoke to King Thidrekssaga and asked him to ride out to meet them. He did so and rode out with his men. And when they met, each greeted the other warmly, and they rode all together to the town. Queen Grimhild stood in a tower and watched her brothers riding into the town of Susa. She saw there many new shields, and many bright byrnies, and many noble warriors. Grimhild spoke. "Now the green summer is fair. Now my brothers are riding with many new shields and many bright byrnies. And now I remember how I grieve over the great wound to young Sigurd." She wept sorely for young Sigurd, and went to meet the Niflungs, and bade them welcome, and kissed the ones who were closest to her, one after the other. Now the castle was nearly full of men and horses, and there were still many hundreds of men and horses outside Susa, so that they could not be counted. King Attila welcomed his brothers-in-law warmly, and then they followed him into the hall that had been prepared. There had been a large fire prepared for them, But the Niflungs did not remove their armor, and they did not lay down their weapons. Grimhild came into the hall, where her brothers were standing before the fire and drying themselves. She saw how they were lifting up their tunics, and that there were bright byrnies underneath. Högni saw his sister, and immediately put his helmet on his head and tightened the strap. Folkher did the same. Grimhild spoke. "Hail, Högni. Have you brought me the Niflung treasure that had belonged to young Sigurd?" Högni answered, "I bring you much enmity. My shield and my helmet, along with my sword, stay with me, and I shall not take off my byrnie." King Gunnar spoke to Grimhild. "Lady sister, come here and sit down." Grimhild now went to her young brother Giselher and kissed him, and sat down next to him, between him and King Gunnar, and then she wept sorely. Giselher asked, "Why are you weeping, lady?" She answered, "I can easily tell you that. I grieve as much as ever for the great wound young Sigurd received between his shoulders, and that no weapon came on his shield." Högni answered, "Let us now leave young Sigurd's wound in peace, and speak no more of it. You should now love King Attila as much as you did young Sigurd before. He is twice as mighty, and you have no need to weep for young Sigurd's wound. Let things be as they were before." Grimhild stood up and went away. Then King Thidrekssaga came in and called out that the Niflungs should go to the table. Aldrian, the son of King Attila, was with him. King Gunnar took the boy Aldrian in his arms and carried him out. But Didrik of Bern and Högni were such good friends that they went arm in arm out of the hall and all the way until they came to the king's hall. On every tower, in every hall, in every courtyard, and along every hallway stood courtly ladies. They all wanted to see Högni, because he was so famous for his valor and bravery. Then they came into King Attila's hall. King Attila sat in his high seat, and his brother-in-law, King Gunnar, sat on his right, and next to him sat the young prince Giselher. Then came Gernot, then Högni, and then Folkher their kinsman. On the left side of King Attila sat King Thidrik of Bern, and Markgraf Rodinger, then Master Hildebrand. These all sat on the high seat with King Attila. The hall was then arranged with the noblest men first, one after the other. They drank good wine that evening, and enjoyed the finest hospitality with all kinds of food, the best one could find, and they were content. There were so many men who had come into the city that nearly every house in the city was full. This night they all slept in peace and were happy, and well provided for. In the morning, the man got up, and King Thidrek and Hildebrand came to the Niflungs, along with many other knights. King Thidrek asked how they had slept that night, and Høgni answered and said that they had slept well. In spite of that, his mood was only mediocre. King Thidrek spoke. "Be happy, my good friend Høgni, and glad with us, and be welcome. But be on your guard here in Hunaland, because your sister Grimhild weeps every day for young Sigurd. And you will have need of all of this before you go home." Thidrek was the first who warned the Niflungs. And when they were dressed, they went out into the courtyard. King Thidrek went on one side of King Gunnar, and Hildebrand on the other, and Folker went with Høgni. Now all of the Niflungs had gotten up, and were going around the city amusing themselves. King Attila now got up, and went out onto the balcony, and saw where the Niflungs were walking. Many men went up to see their stately procession, and they always asked first where Høgni was walking, because he was so famous. King Attila could now see where Høgni was walking with Folker, and their equipment was no worse than that of King Gunnar, and King Attila could not tell for sure which was Høgni and which Folker, because he could not see that clearly, and because they had their helmets on. He asked who was walking there with King Gunnar and King Thidrek, and Duke Blodlin answered, "I believe that is Høgni and Folker." And the king replied, "I should be able to recognize Høgni, because he was here with me for a while. Queen Erika and I dubbed him a knight, and he is certainly our good friend." Høgni and Folker went around the city, and each held the other's arm around the other's shoulder, and they saw there many courteous ladies. They now took off their helmets and let themselves be seen. Høgni was easily recognized. He was slim around the waist, but broad in the shoulders. He had a long face, pale as ashes, and one eye, but it was keen. He was nonetheless a very valiant man. The Niflungs stood with their body of men outside the city walls, and they looked at the city and amused themselves. But King Thidrek of Bern returned now to his court, because he had business to take care of. King Attila saw now what a huge crowd had come together there, and he could not assign all of these people to one hall. The weather was now good, and the sun was shining. He had the feast assembled in an apple orchard. The Niflungs had finally arrived at their destination in Soest, after having spent the first night there. But according to what people told them, and as she stated herself towards them, Grimhild was still weeping for her murdered husband, young Sigurd. And as you're going to hear in the next episode of the Thidrekssaga, here in the Hall of Sagnheim, she remembers very well who was responsible for that murder.